What's up guys, how's it going? Hope you're well. I just wanted to share a longer video today, one that I thought was really important, and it basically came from me doing some reflecting today. And I thought that actually the periods of my life where I've actually seen probably the biggest growth, and maybe that's a bit because of the periods of my life because I haven't, I'm not 97 years old, I haven't lived everything yet, but I have noticed there are some periods of my life where I learn lessons a lot quicker, I tend to bounce back a lot faster, and when I really broke it down, it came down to this, and it was honouring your failures, or learning a lot from your failures. Now, there's going to be a couple of parts to this video, but I'm just going to go through the first part very quickly by saying that there's so much material, so many motivational quotes, so many YouTube videos out there already saying that how failure is a part of success, and it's just a stepping stone, it's not a final destination, so don't take it too personally. You don't need another YouTuber to tell you that. That's already been said like a million times. But what I would say is actually to try and stop looking at things in terms of destinations, like goals and these sorts. It's very important to have them, okay? But it's really key here that when you're looking at your life over the long term, that you see that, all these things that you kind of know to associate with life, like happily ever after, or goals, like feeling happy when you achieve your goal. I've said it before, and I'm sure so many other people have as well, that essentially these are just kind of points in your life, but your life is more like a flowing force. It's a life force, basically. And so when you kind of reach these points, like, oh yeah, we got married happily ever after, or like, oh yeah, I got the job I was wanted, then, all these films where they show these happily ever afters at the end, they don't show you the next day, or they don't show what happens after the person achieves that goal. They wake up the next day and think well, that was great, but now what? I mean, it might not necessarily be as quick as a day, but my point is that these things are very important to work for, but that's not the be-all and end-all, and it's this process. And that's why failure is really important, because failure is part of this process of becoming a better person, enjoying the journey, and actually getting closer to your goals, okay? So what do I actually mean when I say honour your failures? I am actually encouraging you to celebrate your failures. Now, I'm not saying that you have to go out there, buy a really big cake, sit down, get the candles out and say oh, happy birthday, I ruined my life and everyone else around me. You don't necessarily have to do that. But if you honoured your failures, or you valued them as much, or even half as much as people value their successes, you would learn so much more. And the best way to think about it is like this. So there was times in my life where I've messed up, we've all been there, and sometimes when I used to look back, when I was a bit younger, maybe a few years ago, let's say I messed up, or I did something really cringe when I was a teenager or a bit younger, and then a few years ago I would look back on that and I'd be oh god, that's so embarrassing. I could literally feel myself shrinking down. Whereas now I kind of look back on it and I'm oh my gosh, that was actually so funny. Now, I understand that that's actually a very difficult thing to do, because some experiences, especially when you mess up and you feel really self-conscious about it, it can actually influence you from the rest of your life. And I'm in a very fortunate position where, because I actually learned from those failures, I'm actually kind of in a better place than where I was. But if you become very self-conscious, and it's hard not to after a failure, actually your life can be a lot worse. So what I'm saying is, it's very easy for me to make this video and be oh guys, just laugh about your failures, that's fine. But I can really truly recognize and actually relate to at earlier points in my life that when I failed and looked back, like I said, I was shrinking into it because it was so cringy. And if your life actually has been negatively affected by your failure in the short term, it is really hard to look back on that and think how was that a good thing? So I do really appreciate that that is a difficult thing to do. But like I said, when I look back on those failures, and initially I kind of shrunk back and I'm oh no, that's not good. But the thing is, you have to grow from that, and you have to realize that you're not going to get it right every time. And there's so many lessons you can learn from failing. You learn how not to do things. You learn, you actually realize that a lot of times we talk about the pros and cons of making a decision, okay? This is what we say, oh, these are the pros of this is the cons of doing this. But we very rarely actually address a really big issue, which is, because a lot of people, they're paralyzed by this decision, oh, there's this good, there's that bad. There are actually probably more cons to not making that decision. Now, there are different examples where this applies. Okay, so say for example, someone's in trouble medically and they really need treatment, and people are saying, what's the advantage of this treatment, that treatment, and then that person dies because they were still busy weighing up. That's one thing, okay, if their decision is time conscious, by not making a decision, you miss out on that opportunity. But actually, even if that decision isn't time conscious or time dependent, by not making a decision, that is a choice in itself. And if you don't deliberately do that, you passively don't make a decision because you're just too busy, like too paralyzed by indecision, you're in two minds, you can't make any certainty. Actually, as a person, it really does weaken your confidence, and it really does, like I said, there's consequences to not making a decision. And that's why it's important to learn to be decisive. And by failing, actually, you can celebrate the fact that even though you failed, you can still recognize that you were mature enough, or you were confident enough to make a decision. Now, although that decision didn't work, it might have made you feel embarrassed or self-conscious, it was still a decision, and that can sometimes be a lot better than making no decision at all. So that's one way that you can look at your failure as something to celebrate. The other thing is, you found a way that didn't work. So now you don't have to worry in your head like, okay, like, I give this example a lot, but you know, if you are working on a ward, or you're working in like a skill or something, and someone asks you to do it, and it's maybe your 100th time doing it, and it's someone else's 10th time, you know 10 times how, if you failed so many times before, and you can just do these skills, these like skills automatically, then you actually know like 10 ways already how not to do it, or 10 ways that if you start this way, it's just not going to work. Whereas that person who's doing it for the 10th time, they might have only failed 3 or 4 times, and they might actually, because they've done it right 7 times, they might think, oh, I know the way to do it right every time, and they're going to fail again. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, because that person still has to learn. But my point is, actually, it is a really useful thing knowing like what isn't going to work. Now, I'll tell you some, like, so you might think like, oh well, that's great, I just failed at one skill, like what does that mean? Now I know 10 ways it doesn't work. But the thing is, when you then carry over into other aspects of your life, that's actually where the biggest benefits are. So for example, when I was learning fitness, and I was learning how to control my diet better and find a better way of eating, I kept failing like all these fad diets and all these quick ways of losing weight. And I started to realize, actually, it's much better, like, rather than being like, oh, I want to lose like 20 kilos in a few weeks, it's actually better to just be like, I'll just eat a bit less now, and in a few months, like, I might not have lost necessarily as much as I wanted to with that quick loss, but in the long term, I'm going to feel so much better. And actually, that's what happened. I was much better able to stick to my diet. I was much more able to enjoy my training more, because I wasn't just eating rubbish, or like eating like really tiny amounts of food. And I'm going to go on to food and finances in another video, guys, don't worry. But essentially, everything I learned from fitness, I was able to then, all those failures, all those things that didn't work, I was able to very quickly transfer those lessons over to when I tried to improve my personal finances. I was able to see things like, yeah, all these schemes online, like, you know, how to get rich quick. Obviously, as common sense, you know those aren't going to work. But like I said, when you're starting out and you're trying to get into something like fitness, like finance, you do sometimes read these blogs, and it's very easy to fall into the traps of, oh, let me follow this person, they know what they're doing, and actually they're just misleading people. But like I said, by learning those pitfalls, by failing in one area, I was able to avoid failures in another, and I was able to take the approaches that worked and apply them to like a completely different sector of life. So that's another benefit of failing, okay? But really, the whole purpose is to actually stop looking at failure as something that should be avoided. Now, I don't mean just completely fail at everything, but that would actually be a good thing in terms of bringing you lots of lessons. But actually see it as more of like a challenge, like, oh, well, I found a way that didn't work. Now I know what I have to do. I have to find a different way. Like, so many people say they don't know what to do in life, and I mentioned that before in different videos here and there. But now when you fail, you know exactly what to do. So that's why I would say honouring your failures, or valuing them a lot more than you do, is going to be really important for bringing you results in the long term, and as well in the short term. And like I said, it helps you become more of like a well-rounded person, because instead of looking back at things that were like other people say, oh, that was so cringy, why did you do that? Now you can look back and say, like, at least I did it. At least I don't have to go back in my head like every night and think like, oh, what if I did that? Or like, you don't have to live with that kind of almost depression or anxiety in life, like every night thinking like, oh, what if I had just made a decision at that point? Chances are it wouldn't have changed your life that much, but you will never know until you try. And so the fact that you failed is proof that you tried, and that's something that you should recognize, and you should at least give yourself credit for. So that was really the purpose of this video, was to explain some of the benefits of failure and why you should value it more. and why you should actually try to celebrate it, not as much as success, but give it more credit than it's due. So I hope you were able to learn something from this video. If you enjoyed it, share it with someone else. Take care, peace out, follow for more amazing content, drop a like on this video, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks guys, take care.